everybody. Do you see my screen? Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. How are you? Welcome to the IFLA ENSULIB webinar series by the IFLA's Environment, Sustainability, and Libraries section. In this webinar series, we are glad and honored to invite a guest speaker from the publisher Springer Nature to deliver a speech. The title of the webinar today is Publishing for Sustainable Development: How Libraries and Publishers Can Support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Priscilla Poon from University of Macau. I'm the Information Coordinator of the ENSULIB section. Please feel free to type your name, country, or city into the chat. We are happy to have this opportunity to interact with you all. Before we begin, let me start with some notes on privacy and administration. This event is being recorded, including chat. The video will be posted on YouTube, and the link will be posted on ENSULIB's webpage as well as social media. The chat and the Q&A protocol will not be recorded nor published. Microphones have been muted for this event. If you have any questions or comments, please type into the chat or Q&A box. If you have questions regarding privacy, please send an email to this address: professionalsupport@ifla.org. First of all, let me invite Dr. Harry Sahavata, Chair of the ENSULIB section, to have an opening speech for the webinar. Harry, please.
Yes. Hello. It's 10 a.m. in Helsinki, so good morning to all. Although it's already afternoon or early evening to some of you. I'm going to say just a couple of words in the beginning of the webinar. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, also known as the Global Goals, were adopted by the United Nations in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. The 17 SDGs are integrated. They recognize that action in one area will affect outcomes in others, and that development must balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Here we have the idea of SDGs in a nutshell. And I must confess that at first I was a bit skeptical concerning the SDGs. I work in Helsinki City Library, and I wondered, do these global goals have any function for public libraries? Goals like no poverty or zero hunger seem to be quite general and distant from the library framework, whereas a goal like quality education appeared a truism. This is what we do anyway, without any reference to sustainability or environment. However, I have changed my mind for two reasons. First of all, nations and now also some cities have committed into these goals. This means that the sustainability goals include international and municipal strategies, and that make a difference. It is much easier to promote sustainability in your own institution then sustainability is the goal given to you by your superiors and shared with partners. This means that different public actors have to cooperate for the same goals. Hence, the advantage is clear. I might say that things started to happen when people realized this, that we have common goals for which we have to work. Secondly, the SDGs have forced us to consider sustainability from a broader viewpoint. The framework is not anymore just the energy efficiency of library buildings or green office principles, but librarians have to rethink sustainability. How can libraries contribute to sustainable cities and communities, or what could responsible consumption and production mean in the library framework? I find these reasons very important and would like to emphasize that we must broaden our views concerning sustainability further. And that's what we are going to do today when Nicola Jones from Springer Nature will talk about publishing for sustainable development. Hence, the framework may change, but this kind of mixing the frameworks is the point where creativity lies and new ideas emerge. So let us welcome Nicola. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. And now, it's our great honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ms. Nicola Jones from Springer Nature. Nicola has worked in academic publishing for 15 years. She's at present head of publishing for the Springer Nature SDG program, Springer Nature's response to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In this role, she is responsible for coordinating the publishing activities across Springer Nature, where it relates to the UN SDGs, across all relevant disciplines, especially physical, social, and life sciences. Let us now invite Nicola to give a speech on the topic publishing for sustainable development. Nicola, please.
Thank you very much for having me. Let me just pull my slides up for everybody.
Thank you.
Can everybody see those? No? Yes? No, probably not. Here we go. Right, can everybody see the slides now?
Yes.
Great, I'm seeing nods. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really pleased to be able to be here to talk to you about publishers and libraries working together to aid the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I was really happy to hear Harry talk about the importance of cooperation and shared goals in his introduction, because I think I totally agree. That's the only way in which we will achieve a sustainable future for everybody. I'm also going to talk you through what is the Springer Nature Sustainable Development Goals programme? Why do we have one? Why did we set this up? How can libraries support the goals through what you're doing, the very important role that I think libraries have to play here. I'll take you through a couple of partnership projects that we have undertaken here. So one looks at how open research can help to achieve societal impact, and the other is about facilitating collaboration across disciplines and between sectors, very much keeping in mind the importance of partnerships and collaborations and working together. And then I'll finish off with just a few examples of the ways in which Springer Nature have developed our publishing activities in order to best highlight the content that relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then I'm really looking forward to questions from everybody at the end. So, to the best of my knowledge, my role as head of publishing for Sustainable Development Goals is quite unique in the publishing industry. I don't think anybody else has anything quite like this. And this role was created back in 2016, shortly after the goals were adopted, in recognition of the fact that if you are going to address the sorts of global challenges that the SDGs set out to address, you need insights from across all the relevant areas. You need contributions from the social sciences, physical sciences, life sciences, applied sciences, and you need collaboration between policy, between practice, between civil society and research. But back in 2016, when Springer Nature actually was still a very new organisation, we were formed in 2015. We were set up, and we still are to some extent set up along the same lines as many universities are set up. So we have colleagues who work in disciplinary areas. We have a team who are focused on medicine. We have a team who are focused on life sciences. We have a team who are focused on environmental science. And the idea was that we needed to create some kind of central point of coordination to help bring people together who were publishing content that addressed a particular issue, regardless of the format they were publishing in. So they might have been publishing books, or they might have been publishing journals, or they might have been commissioning non-primary research content, for example, through our magazine publishing. But as long as they were addressing the same challenge or shared an interest in the same challenge, we wanted them to be talking to each other in order to better help the people who need that research and that content in the real world to find this content, to access this content, and to develop solutions based on this evidence. So essentially, as this slide says, we set up a dedicated Sustainable Development Goals programme in order to make sure that trustworthy research on important topics gets the attention it needs. And besides my role, this is the focus of quite a lot of people around Springer Nature, not least of all Sir Philip Campbell, who's highlighted here on the slide. He's the editor-in-chief of Springer Nature, and he's the former editor-in-chief of Nature. And he's absolutely right in his quote here in saying that this is something that many of our colleagues at Springer Nature find very inspirational. It's been a way to create collaborations because people want their content to be doing something important. People want to feel like the publishing activities they are undertaking are going to help solve real problems in the real world. So the ways in which we address the SDGs are threefold. We support and amplify the goals by focusing our content acquisition efforts in all the relevant areas towards the SDGs. We've launched new publications and developed new ways to showcase this content, and I'll talk a little bit about this towards the end. By doing this, we hope to reach more people. And it's not just, as I've said, our research publishing. We also publish Scientific American and its international editions that help to communicate this research to a much broader audience beyond academia. We also use the SDGs as a focal point for developing new initiatives in the innovation aspect here, and particularly those which take advantage of the convening power that we have as a large global organisation that's connected with many people around the world to bring together groups that might not otherwise have met. And then finally, we make sure that we act and operate as a sustainable business. So we're committed to addressing the environmental and social aspects of our business. And again, as Harry said in his introduction, sustainable development goes far beyond just the environmental aspects into social impacts and economic impacts as well. The SDGs set out really nicely the ways in which we need to change our behaviour, quite frankly, in order to achieve an equitable and sustainable future for everybody. And so we bring that all together by making sure that Springer Nature kind of walks its own talk in a way. We publish research that helps people understand how to do this. So we need to make sure that we're doing this ourselves. We have a dedicated director of sustainability and a team who are responsible for doing this. And last year, we appointed the first, again, to our knowledge in the publishing industry, the first climate action officer to help move this forward. So Springer Nature's commitment to open access publishing also underpins this approach. If we want to make sure that SDG related content is available to those who are best placed to put it into practice, then facilitating the opening up of access to that content is a really important way of doing this. And I'll talk later on a bit about a project we undertook that looks at this interaction of open research and societal impact. So what about libraries? The purpose of the talk is not just for me to come here and tell you all about what Springer Nature are doing. It's about what we can do together. And considering that the talk has been arranged by the Environment and Sustainability section, I'm sure that this audience is already very familiar with the roles that libraries are playing here. As Harry said, just by doing what you are doing what libraries do in providing education, you are supporting the goals. You're providing access to information. And this is crucial to SDG 4, quality education, but actually to all the goals. As I've said, you need to have trusted research information in order to inform the development of a response. In providing access to this information for free, as libraries do, along with computer access and internet connection, you're helping to reduce societal inequalities in line with SDG 10. And in equipping researchers and students and members of your communities with tools that will lead to innovation, you're acting in line with SDG 9. And that's not to mention everything else I've talked about in terms of aiding the achievement of the goals by providing the trusted information about the challenges they address. Everything I've said that relates to what Springer Nature can do as a publisher applies equally to libraries and the way in which you just go about your day-to-day work. And so it's really fantastic to see the engagement of libraries and library organisations here. The slide that I'm showing at the moment is taken from the IFLA Research Libraries and the Sustainable Development Goals, a storytelling manual, which encourages libraries to share stories and examples of how they support the goals. And I'm sure that you're all very familiar with this, but just in case not, I really highly recommend taking a look and taking inspiration from what other libraries are doing around the world and adding your own examples. So there's quite a lot on there from community libraries, but a bit from academic libraries, which are making equally important contributions. And by bringing these examples together, we can really see the global nature of what's happening and the importance of organisations like IFLA in facilitating these conversations between people who are coming from lots of different places. And it's been really exciting for me to see people adding in the chat this morning where they're coming from. It's wonderful to get a sense that I'm speaking to people who are around the world as far as is possible at this time of day. And the map just really illustrates the very global nature of what we're doing, we need action from organisations and individuals in every single country in the world if we're going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And this just really shows that in, I think, quite a powerful way. So the stories that are included here include examples of university libraries, which are the main kind of library that my work interacts with, running community engagement programs around, for example, things like early years education, very much in line with SDG 4. There are also examples of libraries who've reduced their energy use or switched to more sustainable energy sources, in line with that idea of acting and operating in support of a more sustainable environmental future, and very much in line with SDG 7, which is about affordable and clean energy. And of course, things that you do like online repositories for doctoral theses facilitate knowledge sharing, which is very much in line with SDG 17, partnerships for the goals. And again, in Harry's introduction, he mentioned the integration of the goals and how they're all interdependent. They are all, of course, very important, but the goal where I think that we, libraries and publishers, as providers of knowledge, can make a particular impact is SDG 17, which is partnerships for the goals. Target 17.6 within SDG 17 says, and I'm going to read this now, enhance north-south, south-south, and triangular regional and international cooperation on and access to science, technology, and innovation, and enhance knowledge sharing on mutually agreed terms, including through improved coordination among existing mechanisms, in particular at the United Nations level, and through a global technology facilitation mechanism. And in general, I think it is through partnerships that we can all achieve more than we could alone. So the SDG Accord listed here is the university and college sector's response to the global goals. And for those university librarians who are on the call today, I really recommend taking a look at this and seeing whether your university is signed up as part of this. And if not, perhaps advocating with your leadership that they should sign up to this. This is a really important way in which universities can demonstrate their commitment. And the Sdg Publishers Compact is a similar agreement for the publishing industry, not just academic publishers, but also trade publishers, educational publishers, anybody who is publishing any kind of information that might relate to the goals. So from the kind of research that we publish as Springer Nature, right down to things like children's books that might help to explain societal inequalities and how they operate to preschoolers, for example. So when the Sdg Publishers Compact was launched by the International Publishers Association towards the end of 2020, we knew that we wanted to sign up right away. And it was really easy for us to do this because the commitments that the compact requires were all things that we were doing already through the establishment of our SDG programme 4 years prior. And as a result of our participation in the compact, myself and a colleague are now members of the Sdg Publishers Compact Fellows Group, which is run by the Higher Education Sustainability Initiative, or HESI, which are also listed on the slide. And this group's been a really fantastic one to be a part of. So it brings together publishers, librarians, graduate students, and others who have an interest in providing research information to aid the SDGs. And it's created a forum in which we can share the challenges that each of us face, one of which is around a consistency of understanding of what research relates to the goals. There's no agreed taxonomy here. We've been developing resources that help other signatories to the compact to deliver on the commitments that they've signed up to. And in working together to share this knowledge, we are really learning from each other about the challenges of information provision to achieve the goals. We can't, as you know, as has been one of the themes of this talk, we can't address the goals alone. We do really need to collaborate. We need to listen. We need to understand what the issues are for different people in the system. And it's with this partnership theme in mind that I'm going to go on to talk about a couple of different partnership projects that we at Springer Nature have engaged in. I will say, in putting together this talk, it was really gratifying and to some extent quite challenging for me to see how much we've done over the past 6 years since this program was incepted. I could be here boring you with massive lists of things that we've done over the years, and it's been quite hard to pick out a couple, but I think this theme of partnerships is something that's really, really important, very close to my heart, and something that I think is really powerful. Oh, let me go back. Right, so the Association of Universities in the Netherlands, or VSNU, share our belief in the power of research to address societal grand challenges, and they share our commitment to opening up science. We pioneered a read and publish agreement with them in 2015, and in 2018, we entered into a new strategic partnership with them to investigate whether and how open research facilitates progress towards solving global challenges and how we can help. The project involved first assessing whether articles were addressing global challenges by mapping them to the SDGs. And we worked together with digital science here to co-develop a guided machine learning-based classifier that indicates the relevance of content to the 5 SDGs shown on the slide. So that's SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 4, quality education, SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and SDG 16, peace, justice and strong institutions. And the classifier that was developed as part of this project was extended by digital science into a filter that returns content relating to all 17 SDGs, and that's now available for anybody to use in their Dimensions database. So after we'd identified the content that was societally important, we conducted a bibliometric analysis of the SDG related content that was published open access, and we compared this to SDG related content that was published under subscription access models. We also conducted a user survey of the readers who were accessing this content on our platforms. And we carried out a second survey of over 9,000 researchers around the world to find out more about their feelings on the impact of their work outside of academia and the ways in which they achieve this. And what we found supports the idea that open access publication increases the reach of research addressing global challenges to audiences beyond academia, i.e., those that can implement policy or develop new technology or adapt practice based on research evidence. So we've released a white paper that details the findings, but to summarize right now, what we found was that open access articles relating to the Sustainable Development Goals are downloaded and shared more than subscription access articles relating to the Sustainable Development Goals. We found altmetric scores for SDG related open access articles to be higher than for subscription access articles, but we did not see a clear citation advantage for open access articles over subscription access articles. And what we've taken from this is that the increased attention that those articles are getting via altmetric that's not reflected in the academic citation literature relates to their use and impact in audiences beyond academia. So audiences, we also, I will say, found in the survey data that users who were not themselves conducting and publishing research, and we specifically asked that question, were much less likely to be able to access the full text of subscription access articles on our platform. So the content that they could access was the open access content. And so if we take this all together, the picture suggests that the increased downloads and the increased altmetric scores of societally relevant articles that are open access is a consequence of them reaching more people outside of our core academic audiences. So they will be users who reported that they worked in medical or healthcare organisations, corporations, government departments, consultancies, NGOs, charities, really the people who were working on the ground to solve societal problems. We also wanted to find out more about how the researchers who are publishing their work with us feel about the importance of their research having impact outside of academia. So is this something that actually our authorship base cares about? And how do they go about achieving societal impact for their work? And what we found here was that this was rated as important. Societal impact beyond academia was rated as important for 2/3 of the 9,000 researchers we surveyed globally. And that those researchers believed that publishing open access and promoting their papers via social media were the most effective ways to increase the societal impact of their work. And the exact way in which that societal impact is achieved differs depending on the research. So that might be inclusion in clinical guidelines, it might be reference in policy documents, it might be citations in the patent databases, for example, or it might be other ways, depending on the actual topic being addressed. And so the full results from this very large survey were distilled and published on the project homepage, along with a series of case studies from individual researchers who were interviewed about exactly how they achieve impact for their work. And we also produced a set of infographics that show a kind of average profile of researchers working on different SDGs. So which disciplines their work are based in. For example, with SDG 3, which is good health and well-being, you see the majority of people who list that as an area of their interest work in medicine or biomedicine, as you might expect. We also looked at which other goals people address. So you see quite a lot of crossover between researchers who work on SDG 30, which is climate action, and researchers who work on SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy. Those topics in general go hand in hand. And we also included information about how researchers working on different SDGs actually achieve impact for their work. So there were some differences between the disciplines, and this has been used to produce a toolkit that people can interrogate to find out how they might best achieve societal impact for their work, depending on the area that work addresses. And so the work that we did with VSNU aligns really closely with another partnership that we have with the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Over the past couple of years, we have co-hosted a virtual conference entitled Science for a Sustainable Future, which brings experts together to discuss how we can best bridge the gap between research and policy. We showcase examples of where research has successfully been translated into policy and practice to address the SDGs. So one example that was discussed at an earlier meeting was the Food Systems Dashboard, which is a collaboration between universities and NGOs. And as a result of the first edition of this conference, which took place in 2020, we released another white paper. And this one sets out recommendations for better connecting research and policy. We know from our work with VSNU that researchers want to see their work having impact beyond academia. We know that as a publisher, this is something that we very much want to happen as well. And the Sustainable Development Solutions Network works with academics around the world who are researching topics related to the goals, with the aim of connecting them with other people in the system who can use that that research, they very much share our goal of facilitating that connection between research and the wider world in support of the goals. So 3 of the recommendations that came out of this paper were to further develop existing knowledge infrastructures, institutions and governance that encourage and enable continual iterative engagement between policymakers, researchers and the community in diagnosing problems and in decision-making processes. It can't be one part of the system deciding this is the problem and therefore this is the solution. Everybody has to work together, and community engagement is something that's really important here. The people who are actually working on the ground are the people who know best what the problems are and which solutions will work. We need to increase the translation of the results of scientific assessments across all scales into practical guidance for policymakers and implementers. It's not enough to just publish research in its typical formats and hope that people can take that and use it. We need to be better at explaining what the take-home points are and how they can be implemented. And we need to raise scientific literacy and awareness of the SDGs among citizens and policymakers through greater collaboration, advocacy and outreach. And there's a role for everybody in doing this. We've also engaged in another collaboration with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. This took place towards the end of last year, and the partnership was entitled Learning from Crises, from COVID to Climate. The idea here was to facilitate this interdisciplinary and cross-sector collaboration in a very deliberate way, looking at how we can learn lessons from the rapidly mobilized global response to the COVID pandemic and seeing how these could be applied to addressing the climate crisis, which is no less urgent and no less globally significant, but which has not received the same level of collaboration and urgency around the world. So we convened 2 roundtable discussions, one of which looked at the topic through the lens of behaviour change and misinformation, what we can do to encourage people to act in more climate sustainable ways, and how we could take lessons from the behaviour change that was, to be honest, managed at an enormous scale across the world in addressing the pandemic. And what's the role of misinformation here, whether that's via social media or the mainstream media or friends and family communication. And the other looked at societal inequalities, how the pandemic exacerbated societal inequalities in many cases, and how the climate crisis is doing the same and will do more of this as the situation gets worse. So we had 2 closed door discussions where we brought together about 10 people in each group from different disciplines, different places in the world and different sectors. So they weren't just academics. We had mayors, we had doctors, we had journalists involved in these conversations as well. And the results of the closed door discussions were shared more widely in a live event that took place alongside the COP26 Climate Congress on the 1st of November. We're at the moment developing the outcomes of this into another white paper. We like white papers at Springer Nature, that will help to share some of the insights and discussions and hopefully some hope for the future. So over the years, I mean, even before I moved into this job in 2016, we've wanted to, and we've struggled with the challenge of facilitating interdisciplinarity. And we found that this format, in which we very, very deliberately brought together different people who did not know each other, was a really powerful way to develop new insights. So turning back to Springer Nature and what I outlined at the start in terms of supporting and amplifying content relating to the SDGs, we've been working hard to develop our publishing programs to better do this. And one area that really illustrates this is the development of the Nature Journals portfolio. So the Nature Journals have traditionally been very focused on kind of basic or fundamental science, and with titles based in individual disciplines, so things like nature genetics or nature chemistry or nature physics. In 2011, Nature Climate Change was launched, and it was the first time we brought together research from different disciplines across the physical life and for the first time in nature publications, the social sciences, to address the same topic. And then things went a little bit quiet in terms of addressing global challenges. And in 2016, Nature Energy was launched along the same lines to address the challenge of sustainable energy for the future, bringing together insights from all the different disciplines that can contribute here. Since then, the portfolio has developed really rapidly, with 1 or 2 new journals launched almost every year to host insights from different disciplines that address global challenges. So we had Nature Ecology and Evolution and Nature Human Behaviour in 2017, Nature Sustainability in 2018, Nature Food and Nature Cancer in 2020, Nature Aging last year, and next year we'll be launching Nature Water and Nature Mental Health. Nature Journals and the development of this portfolio is, I think, from a kind of internal Springer Nature publishing point of view, quite interesting, because these journals are only launched where there's community demand for highly selective publications. And so the growth of these areas in the portfolio can be taken to reflect the growth in their importance to the research community. Besides the Nature Journals, we've also developed lots of other publications to showcase SDG-related research. We have a dedicated book series on the SDGs, which publishes under both our Springer and our Palgrave imprints. We have a reference work, the Encyclopedia of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we also have launched 17 hub pages, 1 for each SDG, which showcase content highlights as well as relevant interviews, videos, and blogs from our authors, editors, and colleagues in service of each of the goals. We also host a sustainability community where authors can share insights about the work that they've published. They can provide some more information that wouldn't go into a typical research paper or book, that helps provide some context to the work, why they were interested in studying this area, what were the challenges that they particularly faced in the behind the paper format showcased here. And we also provide space for them to talk about what happened next. So there's a behind the paper format and there's an after the paper format. Did they see their research translated into some kind of real world outcome? Did they see the research go into a future direction that they expected? Did something else happen as a result? And then finally, turning back to our sustainable business programme. So I mentioned that last year we were the first publisher to appoint a climate action officer. We were also the first publisher to sign the climate pledge. We are carbon neutral for our offices, fleet and flights, and we have been since 2020. And we've now committed to net zero carbon by 2040 through both the climate pledge and the Science-Based Targets initiative. We aim to reduce our environmental footprint in a number of different ways. We have a green office network of employees who volunteer to support environmental initiatives in their locations at the side of their day-to-day work, but supported with allowing them to dedicate a certain proportion of their time to doing this. The sustainable business activities do go beyond the purely environmental, though. We champion diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have developed both an internal strategy to ensure that we are being more inclusive of underrepresented groups within our own business, and also an external strategy to ensure that we're doing this within our publications, events, and services. So one policy that's come out of that, for example, is that within the Nature Conferences suite of events that we run, we will not host any all-male panels. We will require that at least 50% of women are invited to be speakers, and we would do our best to ensure a gender balance on the panels. We would do our best to ensure balance across other protected characteristics in the lineups of people that we present. And closely linked with all of this is a commitment to research integrity and to ensuring that information from Springer Nature, whether it's related to the SDGs or to anything else, can be trusted, because it's trustworthy evidence on which to base solutions that will help us to achieve the goals. Thank you very much for listening to me. Here are the places that you can find out more about our Sustainable Development Goals publishing programme and our sustainable business activity. And I am really looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Nicola, for sharing your professional expertise with us. It's really helpful and inspiring. Okay, so next comes to our Q&A session. Let me share my screen. So today our moderator is Dr. Antonio Mataka. She's from University of Sydney. She's also the standing committee member of ENSULIB. Antonio, the floor is all yours. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. Now, everybody, I see that there are some questions coming through in the chat, but there's also the option of adding questions to the Q&A panel if you'd like to do so. In the meantime, we'll turn to the first question, which is from Stella Chow. Thank you, Stella. And Stella has asked, how does Springer categorize scholars' publications into the SDGs in 16 or 17 fields? Nicola.
Thank you. That's a really great question. So we do this in a couple of different ways. So I mentioned the dimensions filters that were developed as a result of the partnership project we undertook with the libraries in the Netherlands. That gives us a way to, what's the word I'm looking for? To analyse at the very large scale the publications that relate to each of the 17 SDGs. So we are the second largest global academic publisher. We publish about, I think, 500,000 articles per year and about 12,500 books. So at the very topmost level, we can't classify that content manually. So we rely on an algorithm to do it for us. And as we were involved in the co-development of the dimensions algorithm, that's the one that we tend to prefer. We are aware that other SDG classifying systems are available. Scopus has one, for example. A couple of different places have different things. But when we are selecting content to highlight on our SDG hubs or to put forward through any other means. So one other thing that I forgot to mention and probably should have mentioned for this audience is the development of ebook lists for each of the SDGs that enable libraries to purchase our content using the single title ebook sales model that we have, rather than by ordering a disciplinary package. But you can see which titles we've published relate to a particular SDG because they will come from everywhere. And for those kinds of uses, we don't rely on the algorithm alone. We use it as a starting point, and then we ask our editors to tell us which of the content that they have they feel is most relevant. So it's automated classification supplemented by editorial expertise, I would say.
Thank you, Nicola. That's a really comprehensive answer. There was a follow-up point from Stella there about whether Springer utilizes keywords in the scholar's publication, but I assume that that's how the algorithm works. It must scan the content.
So the algorithm, I could bore you for a little while about how the algorithm works, but basically it's related to the abstract. the article. It scans the text of the abstract and looks for certain keywords or keyword strings within there. For book content where we don't have abstracts, we use the back cover copy as a proxy for that. So one of the projects that the Sdg Publishers Compact Fellows Group, the HESI initiative, is working on is to see if there can be the creation of some kind of consistent taxonomy that would enable researchers and librarians to more consistently classify content across the SDGs. It's enormously challenging because one of the things that we found and that we see when you bring people into this in terms of editorial expertise is that actually they're quite subjective, and there is a difference of opinion over what content is SDG related. And if you think about something like cancer, you can kind of see that illustrated. So there's tons of basic cell biology research published on cancer. Is that related specifically to SDG 3 when it's about metastasis or tumor creation through inappropriate cell proliferation, for example? Or do we need to define SDG 3 related cancer research as something that's a bit more downstream? It's conversations that I have with my colleagues a lot, and I don't think we've quite reached the perfect way of doing it, but I think we have a good enough way of doing it.
Thank you very much for following up on that point, Nicola. I've also got a question that's come through in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee that relates to read and publish deals. And the question is, the current RMP deals exclude a lot of the Springer Nature titles, mainly nature titles. Do you have plans to change this?
I don't think that I am well placed to answer that question. I actually quite deliberately I'm not engaged in the sale of our content in this way. I can talk about the fact that the nature journals do now have open access publishing options. I think I would be happy to answer that question outside of this meeting after consultation with colleagues.
If that's the case, it may be that the second question, which is related, might need to be answered after consultation with colleagues too, which is about whether you believe read and publish deals are sustainable. And the questioner hopes they would have been more of a transition towards something far more transformational, which really changes the current publishing models and which arguably are not sustainable. I'm not sure if you're positioned to place well placed to answer that now.
I don't think I am well placed to answer that now, but it's something else that I'd be very happy to take back to colleagues and share an answer with you afterwards. What I can say is that from my point of view, I completely understand this concern. I would like to see the research literature to be available in a very equitable way. And we at Springer Nature are, we are committed to doing this in the best way that we can. But the process is going to be a very long-term one. We are, we had several hundred years of print publication and mailed distribution before we even got to online journals. These things take time. But I promise I will take these back.
That's good of you. Thank you very much, Nicola. We don't have any other questions that have come through for the moment. And as the audience is still busy thinking about questions they might like to ask, should we give it a moment or two, just in case anything else comes through? Please feel free to type a question either into the Q&A or into the chat. Priscilla, it doesn't look like there's anything else coming through for the moment.
Yes, there's one question.
Oh, I have just seen
There's
one.
one. There's one coming. Oh, sorry, there we are. That just popped up on my screen. Thank you. Are other publishers doing this with mapping the Sustainable Development Goals to published outputs?
Yes,
that
they
you
are.
know of?
Yeah, so different publishers do it in different ways. So Scopus has its own classifier that categorizes content to SDGs. So anything which is in Scopus, which is not just Elsevier content, of course, it's lots of other content from other publishers can be classified in that way. Elsevier also at the RELX parent company level run something called the SDG Research Centre, which brings together content from across their different businesses. So it would include resources like LexisNexis alongside Elsevier publications classified to different SDGs. Taylor and Francis run a portal called SDGs Online, which is a resource that libraries can purchase access to that brings together content from their books and journals related to each of the SDGs. There's an organisation called Science Open who run an SDG portal on their platform. So they aggregate open access published content from lots of different places. And they map this to the SDGs and they offer this as a service to different publishers and to different institutions. I think UCL, for example, you can go to Science Open and find all of the UCL content that's classified to different SDGs. Cactus Communications, through their R Discovery platform, also map content to SDGs. Emerald, I think, are doing this through one of their online platforms. So it is something that lots and lots of publishers are becoming increasingly interested in doing. And that's one of the reasons that working with the representatives from other places, but also talking to librarians and graduate students through the Hessianist initiative is so kind of interesting and powerful. We all have a shared goal here, and in a relatively non-competitive way, to make this information available. The more information that is available, regardless of where it's been published, and when I say regardless of where it's been published, I guess I mean discipline, format, and publisher. The more information that's available to the more people, the better chance we have of actually solving these problems and achieving the goals.
Really great to hear that there's so much work happening across this space. And I wonder, I have a question myself, if I may ask one. I wonder whether over time there may be a uniform approach developed across publishers who are doing these mappings, so that there perhaps is an industry standard that might be developed. Is that something that's been in discussion at all?
That is one of the points of discussion with the HESI Sustainable Development Goals Publishers Compact Fellows group. So it's very much on the agenda there, because there was a preprint published maybe about a month or two ago that looked at, I think, 4 different classification systems and how they classified content to SDG 13. It found actually surprisingly little overlap between those. So there's a lot of variability in what content people feel relates to particular goals. And if there were to be some kind of industry standard that would also be more inclusive, you know, it doesn't just have to be the Elseviers and Springer Natures of the world, who are very large publishers, but smaller publishers who maybe don't have the resources to develop their own classification system or purchase something that somebody else has put together. If there was something that were more available and more standardized, then more people could use it. So yes, it's on the agenda, but we're at the sort of point of, this is a really hard problem. How do we start addressing it?
Yes, it is a complex problem to solve. Thanks for answering my question. Whilst we've been talking, it doesn't appear that any other questions have come through. So unless anything else comes through in the next few seconds, we might close off the Q&A. But thank you for answering everybody's questions, Nicola.
Thank you. And I'm really sorry that I'm not positioned to answer the questions about read and publish deals at this point. I appreciate that this is of particular concern and interest to this audience, and I will consult with my colleagues and send something back through Priscilla to distribute to everybody.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you all for your participation today. It's been our pleasure to host this event and hope to see you again in our next webinar. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.